Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for May 2021. Welcome the Mayor, Portfolio Leader, Councillor Carl, Chief Executive, General Manager of Planning and Development. The meeting, as you know, is open to the public, and we welcome all the people who are watching on the live stream. I'd like to thank those of you who are in the room today and everyone watching via Council's social media channels. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarowawa peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the rich traditions and the bold ambitions of Australia's first people. I don't have any absentees or apologies, don't have any requests for leave of absence. So we move to item number 3, which is the temporary incentives policy request for infrastructure charges discount at Oakey. And Nadia, thank you, is going to present to us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen and councillors. Wendy, if we could have attachment 4, please, up. The report before you is to consider a request for an infrastructure charges discount in accordance with the temporary economic development incentives for district townships policy 2.32 for material change of use, rural residential to residential, and reconfiguring a lot 1 into 120 lots located at Lot 2, AG 3900 Oakey Katela Road, Oakey. As you can see on our screen up there, that is the subject site. And it's, as I said, it's located in Oakey. The approved stage development is shown in attachment 5. If we could have attachment 5, please, Wendy. So please note that this development has been approved in 3 stages. And that's the overall site plan over there, or approved layout plan, pardon me. An extension approval for an additional 2 years, extending the currency period until 4 February 2023 for MCUC 2005-11427/D, and a change approval MCUC 2005-11427/E were issued concurrently on the 6th of February 2021. An amended infrastructure charges notice with a total charge amount of $2,793,125.16 was also issued on the 6th of February 2021. The total charge amount for each stage is detailed as follows. Stage 1, $1,103,167.08. Stage 2, $1,455,241.68, and Stage 3, $234,716.40. A request for an infrastructure charges discount was made under the policy seeking to reduce the amount levied in the amended infrastructure charges notice on the 23rd of February 2021. The request satisfies the criteria of the policy, and it is therefore recommended that a discount of $1,067,625.16 be applied in accordance with the policy, as detailed in the recommendation of the report. It's also noted that because the development is staged, the total levy charge is apportioned by stage. The discounted amount payable for Stage 1 is $681,500. The discounted amount for Stage 2 is $899,000, and the discounted amount payable $45,000. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. Councillors, we start off with questions. Councillor Carl.
I'll look, and subject to any question or debate, I'm happy to move at the appropriate time, Councillor Megan.
Thanks, Councillor Carl. Is there any questions from the floor? Okay. Councillor Carl, did you want to move recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. So seconder, Councillor Von Hoff. Does anyone like to debate?
Just a question.
A question, sorry, Councillor Shine.
Just a question, if I could. The cap here is $14,500
per vacant lot. That's correct, Councillor.
Just wondering, how long has that been in operation? That cap, and has there ever been any consideration to increase it with CPI, or having a regard to the increased, no doubt, increased cost of drug services, that type of thing? So is it, in concrete forever, or are we going to adjust it, taking into account, the important factors of the cost of infrastructure, trunk infrastructure occurring, and whether or not that's sustainable from the point of view of the subsidy that the other ratepayers of the region provide for the benefit of this scheme?
Okay, I think I know how to answer that. However, if I get a bit lost, I'll ask my manager to come over. I think to answer the first part of your question is that the policy 2.32 sets out how much. Sorry, no, it's not the policy. It's the It'll be the council. It'll be the resolution for the charges that sets out how much per vacant lot we give. So when we issue, or when a development approval comes into council, and you are adding additional lots, we basically give a flat rate of 14,500 per lot. Is that correct, Danielle? Or am I getting it confused?
That's the cap. Yep.
But it's either in the policy or the council resolution charges, number 4.
Councillors, the policy was introduced probably originally, it'd have to be 4 or 5 years ago, I'd say. And from recollection, it was renewed last year in August. I probably can't answer the question of whether the capped amount, because from recollection I think it's always been the cap of 14,500 ever since the policy was implemented some 5 or 6 years ago, and I can't answer the question of whether it's been considered whether that cap should increase or not. I would anticipate it was just a decision to continue the policy. Probably, to be honest, you will have seen a number of requests have come to council under that policy, but there hasn't been a substantial uptake. So I guess there's never been a concern that we will exceed probably the $3 million total cap that was set. But certainly that is something that in the future, if there is a mind of council to consider increasing that cap, then certainly that is something that the relevant area can look at in terms of that policy.
Is it a cap imposed by council or decided by council or imposed by state government?
Council.
Okay.
Under the policy.
Right. And I take it that the cost of providing the trunk services as indicated in the brief are accurate and not, they are accurate. In other words, the balance is a subsidy by the rest of the ratepayers.
Yes.
There's no further questions, so we have a mover, Councillor Carl, seconder Councillor Von Hoff. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we move to item number 4, which is the Development Assessment Regional Development Statistics Report, delivered by General Manager Stuart Summers. Thank you, Stuart.
It's come up very quickly this morning. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, Madam Chair. Look, I'll just stick to basic facts, I think. We're comparing March and February this time. We had 177 lots sealed in March compared to 119 lots sealed in February. So we've got quite a few sealed lots, additional sealed lots out there. And we've had in March 33 new lots through RAL approval compared to the 63 that we approved in February. House approvals have dropped away a bit, in fact by 50%. March we had 57 dwelling approvals across the region compared to the February figure of 103. And I have to say that that reduction there is probably to do with workload and a whole range of other issues, because there's certainly plenty of lots being sealed and on the market at the moment. And again, number of units is a very sad sort of number. In March we had 7 units approved across the region compared to 6 in February. So total building approvals, and I guess those numbers are reflected in the valuations. We had in February $45.5 million invested in building, all sorts of building across the region, compared to March of just under 30 million. And I might leave it there, councillors. Any questions?
Mr Summers, I wouldn't mind if you could, for the benefit of the councillors who weren't at the breakfast this morning, the UDIA breakfast, talking about the rental market in Toowoomba, if you wouldn't mind giving a précis of what you took from that?
Oh, well, thanks.
Well, I think, you know, I think what we need to convey to the community that we are very concerned about the rental
absolutely,
crisis. So,
we are.
Call it a crisis, or...
Yes, and we heard from 2 speakers, Tim Lawless, who's pretty well known around the place in terms of a commentator on property, real estate and the like, and our very own local Katie Knight. Katie spoke quite specifically about the rental issues, and she did describe it as a crisis, and she did couch it in terms of, she doesn't use the term lightly, but it's probably appropriate at the moment. She reflected on the current vacancy rate of being about 0.6%, and I think it's been sitting at that for a couple of months now. But as Tim Lawless said, you can never get to 0 really, because there's always natural churn in the rental market, so it gets down to a pretty low figure like 0.6. And that's really just accounting for the natural churn in changeovers of rental accommodation. She commented about the lack of rental investors for a start. Toowoomba, compared to, say, Sydney and Melbourne, which have rental properties at about 40% of the total offer of housing, Toowoomba is languishing around 30%. And it's probably not getting a lot better at the moment, because as you reflected, that there's a number of landlords that are actually selling their houses to owner-occupiers. And she gave a number of other interesting figures, but I guess sufficient to say that they're getting many applications for each and every house that comes up for rent, or unit that comes up for rent. And there is, you know, she believes around that 200 odd people that are washing around the city at the moment looking for rental accommodation. Issue there. She also mentioned, Katie Knight, also mentioned the fact that even the very basic rental accommodation in the city is going through a price hike. It's gone from, what did she say, around that 200, was that the figure? 200 mark, $200 a week, to nearly $300 a week, which is a heck of a jump for people that are on a very basic income. And I think one of the issues, as an aside, one of the issues that didn't come out this morning very strongly was that role, the important role that the state government plays in the provision of housing in the areas where the market fails. And that's the area that she was talking about there, where the very basic of basic rental accommodation is, the price is going up quicker than anywhere else. So the state government, whose fundamental role it is to provide for social housing, low-cost housing, rental housing, is relying pretty heavily at the moment on some of the not-for-profits that certainly the state helped to set up, but nonetheless there's still a role there for the state government. I might leave it there. Was that sufficient?
Oh, I suppose I really wanted you to comment on the feeling of council's role in, you know, what levers we could pull in that. And I know I've got a couple of questions here. So
okay. as I think was admitted this morning, there's not a heck of a lot of levers that Council has to pull in regard to this matter, other than what we tried earlier on with the incentive scheme, which related to a reduction in infrastructure charges. There was a suggestion from the floor this morning about possibility of having a rates holiday for people that purchase, investors that invest in rental accommodation. I think mentioned something like 2-year rate holiday to encourage and maybe bolster that initial income from that investment. Other mechanisms, of course, relate to the planning scheme itself and how easy we make it for developers to build units or medium density to fill in that slot. As most of us know, many of the medium density housing offer does end up as rental, as investment properties and on the rental market. But at the moment, there is a bit of a lull in that form of housing being built across our region.
Okay, we'll just take a couple of questions. Councillor McMahon.
Well, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Stuart. Perhaps a comment and a question. I welcome the need for sort of higher density unit-style duplex living. Prior to my time, we did that with a few incentives, and I certainly, while we can offer them, I wouldn't want us to see us go down that particular path the same way again. My question, however, just wanted to pick your brain on it. We've learnt this morning, and thanks to the UDIA for that breakfast, that, you know, land supply is one issue, but I just wanted to, there was another issue that didn't come up, may not be specifically your hat, but you'd probably, just if you had some statistics on it, that if we put a 1,000-block greenfield site now, the backlog in builders and builders getting supply and, you know, just backlog of builders would probably mean it would take a fair while, regardless of how well it's sold, to build in those larger developments. I just wonder if you had any comments or statistics on if our building industry is starting to catch up with demand at the moment, or they're going in that regard.
I don't have any specific numbers, but certainly hearsay around the traps is that most builders, local builders in particular, have shut their books at the moment. They cannot take on any more contracts. And the other major issues are the shortage and the rise in price of steel products for building and concrete products for building. And also I heard only a couple of days ago about timber. Apparently timber for framing is also in short supply. It's on a backlog of about 4 weeks, which is a heck of a time for a builder, because it only takes a few days for the slab to cure sufficiently to start putting the frame up, and if they've got to wait 4 weeks for a frame. So I guess the thing is that they need to order ahead, which is always fraught and financially fraught as well for many builders. So, yeah, look, there's a bit of a log jam. We'll get through that, and it's going to be interesting to see what the horizon looks like on the other side of that log jam, because it may well be a complete slowdown, or as hopefully what the pundits this morning were saying, that it may actually continue on. That, you know, that incentive provided by the federal government will flow on and have a tail off into for a few years. So hopefully that's the case. A little less frenetic than it is at the moment, and hopefully all the concrete companies and the steel companies and everything can catch up.
It's a good time to be a tradie in Toowoomba.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the other thing, of course, the shortage of tradesmen. Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just firstly, the framing. I did hear over the weekend that they're actually using more expensive timber now because they can't get the pine. So,
That's right.
you know, that's adding to their costs, and also that's passed on, obviously. In relation to the 0.06%, I don't think I picked up you thought that that was okay, that it had been going on for a few months. I think you did realise that was a negative, that it's been going on for a few months, because that's it really impacting people's lives on the ground. They don't have a home to live in, or anything to live in. It's a tent or on a sofa in someone's home. So, and I know friends of mine are scrambling to try and get housing. So it is a tough game at the moment. But I did wonder whether we have or could write to the state government in relation to social housing, to put pressure on them so that they understand, you know, if we can outline the difficulties that are being experienced in our communities and put pressure on them to deliver more social housing to ease the pain for some of these people.
Yep. What we're actually doing in that particular area, we haven't, I don't think we've set a date yet, but we're going to be briefing or bringing some people to brief council. They'll be coming from the State Government Housing Department to talk to council about what strategies they have. I haven't heard of any, but they may well have some strategies to tell us about in terms of housing and what type of housing and for whom. But also we're going to hear from Brisbane Housing, which is a not-for-profit, and the federal government, sorry, the state government and council, of course, set up Brisbane Housing some years ago, but it seems to have stepped in, a bit like Gold Coast Housing has, into a number of those markets where the private sector does fail. But the thing that concerns me a bit is that they are also significantly competing with the private sector in areas that the private sector can adequately provide for. So it's really, I think my concern is that there's not sufficient public money going towards that area of the housing market that it needs to be invested in to help take some of the heat out of the rental market, but also to provide for those people that can ill afford to pay some of the prices that the private sector need for their margins.
Thanks, Stuart. Just to follow up, if I could. So, Stuart, how quickly are these briefings going to happen from Queensland Government and Brisbane Housing? Because we're talking about people's lives here.
Indeed. It's a bit like herding cats, actually, getting these folk together. But I've got Jade Bebbington working on that, and I'll find out what tentative date is, and I'll send that round to councillors. It's as soon as we possibly can do it. We were hoping to have had it done already, except we've had a couple of situations where we had a tentative date set with a couple of the folk, but they had other problems with that date later on, so we had to push it off. But it'll be within the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay, so I just wonder whether that letter to the state government could go beforehand anyway.
Yes. Yep. I'll talk to the CEO and the Mayor and my Chair about that. Yep.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Summerfield, I've had an opportunity to take up that very matter with a senior state cabinet minister, and his response to me, well, it's happening all over the state, but I think I agree, we need to be well briefed on that. Look, I just heard a comment this morning from Tim Lawless, and I thought it was appropriate to, so it got me thinking about a few different things. He spoke of the impact of a single owner owning a big percentage of the developable land in Toowoomba. And then in recent times we've seen some, in an email, I think there was a reference to mountain goat country that has been approved for subdivision. I just wonder if it's not appropriate that we had a good look at the whole amount of land that's available now, as we stand now for subdivision, and just look at the impediments so that we as a group, colleagues and I, can get our head around just exactly where we are with the land development. And I That's the first time I've heard reference in a meeting like that to a single owner being an impediment to the development of blocks in Toowoomba.
Yes, that's land banking, and it's quite legitimate. A lot of the bigger players that we don't have here in Toowoomba, but certainly they're players on the coast, significantly land bank for many years ahead, and it certainly pays dividends for them, as no doubt it does for a couple of our developers. So yes, and that's one of the factors you have to take into account when you are looking at future land earmarked for urban development, because at the moment it's earmarked, and particularly if it's new greenfield areas, you'll find normally that larger developers will be moving out and taking control of that land and land banking it for the future. And when the market is right, they will start developing it. I guess the interesting thing with one of our land bankers is that he is not that sensitive to the market. He's somewhat impervious to the market, so it's a luxury developers have. So that's the situation. But to answer the substance of your question about talking to the issue of supply, well, we'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks. Yep. The consultants that came last week to just introduce the topic of planning for a future settlement pattern, so to speak, where the future growth areas will be. They spoke to us last week in an initial way. They'll be coming back in a couple of weeks with a lot more detail, a lot more analysis of areas, and they'll pick up the mountain goat country, and they'll certainly pick up a lot of other areas and also have a more accurate estimate of what we have at the moment, what's developable, what's not, and what we might need in terms of future land allocations going out 15 years. We have, according to state government and some of our own estimates, we have between 3 and 5 years of developable land at the moment, which is well short of the 15 years that's recommended to have. However, it's not going to cause an immediate crisis. Short term, we have sufficient land to provide for this current growth spurt, but we definitely need to be looking at future land for urban development going forward.
Yep. I just think it would be appropriate. I have seen some mapping, and I'd hope everyone can get a good look at that mapping and get their heads right around where we're going, where we can go. And I think by looking at a map, very often you get a better idea than just simply talking about it. So hopefully we can do that in the not too distant future.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Carlton.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments, if I may, on the back end of some others. I'm wondering, I don't know, Stuart, Brian, Mr Mayor, whether the LGAQ conference up and coming, the agendas have closed off, but it would be a good forum for this council as part of a collective, no doubt, to represent the issue of state government's responsibility in affordable housing, social, whatever you want to call that, and how they can play their part in a statewide, if not national, situation. But relative to state, I think if we can, let's get it on the agenda as part of a collective. No doubt there'll be other major and smaller councils possibly raising this issue too. And I would assume I won't be attending, of course. I'm unable to, but I imagine there would be a minister there at the appropriate time to raise these issues as a collective representative body. The other thing that I would, and councillors may not want to, but further to the Mayor's suggestion of being familiarised with a plan, maybe we do a tour for those of us who might want to be brought up to speed about what is actually out there as far as land availability, and particularly within the PIA, and on the back end of some of the comments around mountain goat country and suitability. I just feel that a visual appreciation sometimes really helps put things into perspective. And I'm asking Mr Summers, if possible, if councillors want, that we jump on a little minibus or whatever you so desire, and as long as we can communicate as a collective about some of the challenges and opportunities we see, it might help councillors contextualise that along with the up and coming sessions that the consultants speak to us about, and with future projections in mind. So I just think it'd be a good opportunity. Don't know how you feel, councillors, but I, for one, wouldn't mind doing that. Probably do it with the GM or another staff member if others don't.
No, always happy to do that, and might be really good maybe to hear from the consultants first about what land they might be looking at. They gave a few hints last week with that bubble diagram. It was quite illustrative where the growth is at the moment, where the future growth is from the work that they've done. It didn't take a rocket scientist to work it out, but they illustrated it quite nicely. But yes, certainly, I think once we've heard from the consultants, we can then and even maybe bring them along, but certainly have senior staff from engineering, from water, from planning to help as well, because it embraces a whole range of issues.
Just as one who's been in the portfolio of planning and development before, and listening to the dialogue back then as to some of the comments I personally fielded at the meeting this morning at the UDIA, I feel I would like to be refreshed around that, the availability of land, the types of land, because some of the, I guess, in my view, not so informed opinions about restraints that I heard, not from the floor, from the front of the room, but afterwards, I'd suggest to you that part of the frame area of Toowoomba wouldn't be built right now if they were considered challenges or impediments back in the day. We wouldn't have whole subdivisions or whole areas, and I won't name those areas, but on suggestion of some of those light comments, I don't see them as challenges or impediments. Rather, there's opportunities because there's already existing major developments and suburbs in those frame areas, of which were posed to me as you can't build there because there's too many challenges.
Councillor Shine.
No, thanks, Chair. You might like to comment on my comments, but arising out of this discussion this morning. But in relation to the provision of social housing, the biggest, in my lifetime, the biggest investment of that has always come from the Commonwealth, particularly after the Second World War. If you look at the suburbs of Brisbane of Seven Hills, Carina, Mount Gravatt, and even Harlexton North and Toowoomba, the bulk of that money came from the Commonwealth. It was the state departments that built the houses or arranged for it to be built, but the funding was always from the Commonwealth. More recent times, not as significant but fairly significant, was the Rudd social housing program, where that funding came from the Commonwealth, again built by the state. So rather than writing to the state, I think a budget on tonight, this afternoon, better to be putting pressure on our Commonwealth government representatives to come to the party there. As we know, they take about 80% of the tax taken in the country as it is, and that's where the money will come from historically and in fact as well. Certainly that Brisbane housing project to which you referred is a really spectacular one, I think. But that is a partnership between the Brisbane City Council and the state government, so it would require us, if we wanted to replicate that up here, to put funds in ourselves. And people might consider that's not our core business, but nevertheless, it depends on how serious we are about tackling this social evil of homelessness, as to whether or not we think it's something that we should be putting on our ratepayers. vacancy rate, or lack of it, if you like, of 0.06. Some of us attended the business breakfast out at Highfields last week, and the real estate agent there gave us an instance where he had a telephone call from a client in Sydney who wanted to buy 16 houses at Highfields for investment, presumably rental investment. And I just wondering, is that at odds with what you heard this morning? It would appear to be from what you said was said this morning, and also what effect does that have on housing affordability, or young people, or any person really wanting to buy a first home? I think in the long run, the Commonwealth Government's housing grants and the state government's housing grants have created this unusual demand, but the most likely reason it will continue will be because of bank interest rates being at record low, rather than past government grants, in my view anyway. And just finally, in relation to that land banking issue, I think you yourself showed us an article recently from a journal which showed that Toowoomba in fact had more land available in the PIA than most of those other regional cities. You might like to comment on that, and whether it would be appropriate for those advocating that we make more land available, that we suggest to them politely perhaps they should put pressure on the persons or person who owns most of the land within the PIA, rather than putting pressure on the council.
Yep, that was a UDIA article in their magazine, which looked at all the land availability in years, and Toowoomba was one of the better ones. There were Gold Coast, which I think was about 1 or 2 years, and Brisbane was 3 years, I think, and Toowoomba was, I think, around 6 years, according to that article. Yeah, but it's fairly academic, I guess, because they are all very small numbers when the ideal, in terms of a way forward, is to have around 15 years ahead of you. Between 12 and 15 years is the ideal. So even 5 or 6, if we do have that, then that's still getting down towards the bottom of the barrel. But yeah, it was interesting this morning, return on investment in Sydney and Melbourne for landlords is around 2% or slightly below. The general returns they're getting here in Toowoomba at the moment is around 5%, between 5 and 6%. Very attractive for a Sydney investor when they see those sort of figures. So yes, if there is someone ringing up like that, then it's not at odds with what was said this morning. It's very much consistent with what was being said this morning, that in fact a number of investors are starting to look at Toowoomba and other regional centres across Australia, and particularly in Queensland. Yes, some years ago, Toowoomba Toowoomba Regional Council did think about, and only briefly, setting up something like Toowoomba Housing. We got Gold Coast Housing up here to talk to council. Brisbane Housing at that stage were not interested in anything outside the Brisbane city boundaries. It's changed a lot now. They're doing most of their work actually outside Brisbane. Yeah, we have looked at that. The state government was a little dismissive and said that we'd have to pay for it. They wouldn't provide any assistance at that stage. This would be going back about 7 years, I guess. But there's nothing to stop us from working with people like Brisbane Housing and the Gold Coast Housing Company, because they are effectively government arms. They're not for profit. They're run like private enterprise. But as I said earlier, the only concern I have is that they tend to also compete with the private sector, and I'm not sure why that is when there's such a demand in the lower end of the market, in that end where the private sector fails, it can't get the margins required to actually go and service. I mean, private developers certainly would service those sectors if they could, if there was a margin there. So it's a matter of working through either how we get the margin for the private sector or how we get the not-for-profits to come in and actually focus in that area. That's the issue, and I think that's probably why we need to write probably to more than just the state government, maybe the feds, and maybe when we bring Brisbane Housing and Gold Coast Housing up here, we'll have a good chat to them about what they can do. Because that's probably our biggest role, is as advocates, and because we don't have that many levers to pull, but we can certainly advocate.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in a second. Councillor O'Shea and then Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Probably on a similar point, I think, look, we recognise down the front, Stuart. There you go. We recognise the situation as it sits, and we continue to hear it and see it in the public realm around, whether it's social housing or the rental crisis as it sits. And to go back to the question, I think that the chair, or what levers does council have to pull? So, just on the points you made there, so the way I sort of looked at it is that yes, it's an issue that sits above council, and you're right, probably will take a collaborative approach. But what levers does council have to pull? I would have thought that if there was a desire of this council to want to be in this space or to play a role in this space, the lever we would have to pull is that, well, we are the charger and collector of fees. So we as a council set different incentives all the time, whether it's CBD development, shop top living, glasshouse developments and things like that. So you talk about creating a margin that's there for the private investor. That would be a lever, surely, that we would have to pull. And again, I know there's a lot of pieces that come with that, but I mean, if it's around an incentive scheme around developing this style of development, but then it would need another level of involvement. And you talk about Brisbane Housing or Gold Coast Housing, but I mean, we've got similar organisations here and that work in this space, your Lifelines, your Yellow Bridges, and again, I know it's a lot of pieces to come together, but surely there's an opportunity or a conversation that could be had around that, where it's as if we as council wanted to play a role without being directly involved, that would be a way, that would be a lever that we do have to pull, because, well, we do it all the time. If we want inner city living development, if we want the incentives we've got in regional areas, if we want, as I said, the glass houses of recent times, that would that or would that not be a lever that could be investigated, looked at as to how council can play its role of trying to help facilitate something in this area?
Absolutely, and we have done that as councillors. You may have predated you arriving on council, but council did have an incentive for medium density.
But more around social housing, I mean, that would be used for that element, because again, if you, sorry to say, because my point, I suppose, is say myself as investor, you're right, so I'm not going to invest in something as private investor when my return can only be at a set amount because it's set for social housing. So I'm meaning is if that is an outcome that we see as is necessary in this region, that could be an option where you talk about creating that margin that makes it viable for someone to want to do, and you achieve a social outcome of creating affordable housing for people in the market that are struggling. Yeah,
I'm not sure that even waiving infrastructure charges would be sufficient to build the margin up. Working at that level in terms of that part of the market. Certainly, when we were trying to incentivise medium density development, we did use the infrastructure charges lever, and that started off slowly and then became exponential and shot us off the charts, really. And we had originally, I think, budgeted for around foregone income of around $3 to $4 million. We ended up a lot more than that. But we certainly got a lot of units built in a short time, which was good and bad. So if we were to go down that track again in any form, we'd be much more careful in terms of the type and quality and design of what was being on offer. But local government generally has limited. I mean, even it's difficult to work with the private sector, even with land, surplus land, because we're caught up in that, how do we transfer the land to a private entity, whereas with a not-for-profit government type agency, we can actually deal with them. You know, there's a lot of regulatory red tape and other barriers that don't help in this area. But, you know, clearly it is the responsibility of the two layers of government above us, very, very clearly, and I think there's been somewhat of an application. I can go back to Gough Whitlam and Cities Commission, and he was the first really Prime Minister to introduce housing incentives directly through into the cities. But that's ancient history now.
Just really quickly follow on that. Yeah, no, totally understand it and totally agree on those other levels of government, but I just mean it's something that continues that we know is an issue in this area. It might take something a little bit different where we need to look at it if it's something we really see where we need to find some sort of an outcome or potentially a solution. What levers do we have to pull? What options can we have to be involved in it is all.
Yep, and I think we can it'll be real. I think when we have these people come up and talk to us, it'll generate a lot of discussion and possibly some ideas for solutions will come out of that, hopefully. But I will get back to councillors with a date. I'll see what Jade's working to at the moment, and but it hasn't been easy to actually round them all up. And I've got a note from the manager planning, which says rental housing is being turned into Airbnbs, is contributing to the shortage of long-term rentals as well. So that's another influence. You know, Airbnbs, short-term versus longer-term rental.
Councillor McDonald?
No, thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I think you know, we certainly as a local government have a role to play, and James put some good ideas forward. I think our greatest opportunity is perhaps to look at some of the land that council owns that's nothing's being done with it, because I don't think we necessarily want to get in place of doing the roles of state and federal government. Councillor Shine makes a good point around the National Rental Affordability Scheme, which will close. In fact, they stopped applying that scheme to investors in 2014, and it was over a 10-year period. So those will all come off by 2026, which will put an added pressure on people looking for places. So it's more of a case of, as Councillor Summerfield points out, a case of lack of supply rather than the price in most cases, to be honest. And we heard that this morning around affordability. Price certainly is driven by the lack of supply, but you know, it's the fact that you've got 40 and 50 people looking at a house even to buy, not necessarily to rent even, which is unheard of. So I think everything needs to be on the table, but I do think that the money saved by the federal government with the reduction of the National Rental Affordability Scheme, which is estimated to be around $3 billion by 2026, may well be an opportunity for the federal government to invest more in social housing and perhaps more in the Commonwealth rental assistance for those that require it as well. But I do caution us taking on roles of other levels of government. But the point I would like to make, another option for us around land, if there's land that we could perhaps incentivise that may not be suitable for private investors, but it may be for some social housing, or places like the Salvation Army, who have an application in council at the moment for units, or a complex in Snell Street, which runs parallel to Railway Street off Russell Street, that will house some 50 people, whether it's 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and we've got a live application in council right now for that. So a way of encouraging investment in that area is probably a place that we could play in. So really just a comment more than anything, but I think the National Rental Affordability Scheme, the federal government have wound back, should provide, and the reason it's done is because they need to look at different ways of funding this area, and to have $3 billion extra dollars by 2026, and that's going each year, opens opportunities and may well be part way of them being able to fund the what will be announced tonight, as we hear in the media, the 2% deposit for first home buyers. So, you know, all these things are happening right across the nation, but what we have at the moment, I wanted to make the point, is that the Salvation Army are investing in this area for that space. They've done it for a long time, and that'll be a good project if we can certainly help wherever we can as a council to promote that they're doing that. It may well encourage others of similar ilk to do the same or in fact grow it.
Couldn't agree more. My only fear is that the 2% scheme might force a change from rental to owner occupancy even more, and also possibly push the price mechanism because of the increase in demand. And they're the issues, and in a situation where production is at its limit at the moment, I mean, there's only one factor that can pop out, and that could be price increases, which would be very unfortunate, because I mean, and particularly in regional centres where the income generally is, the average income is a bit lower than for the capital cities, you find that affordability that they were talking about this morning, that affordability is a factor, and it's being affected by price increases increasing at a greater rate than the average income.
Thanks, everyone. I think that's been a great discussion. Stuart, I'm going to throw a bombshell in, because I know the accepted wisdom around the table seems to be that it's really the purview of the state or federal government. But I read other councils in, particularly in Australia, like Yarra and Willoughby, they have affordable rental housing policies. So we as a council can do that, and you touched on that a little bit, that you'd gone down that route before, and they have things like inclusionary zoning and voluntary planning agreements. So I would really like, either as a part of that session where, well, probably not as a part of that session, but a separate session, to examine some of those things. So, you know, we do have levers at a local government level. So in Parramatta, I'll just read this out, because they nominate that 10% of land value uplift in areas outside the Parramatta CBD will be captured by the council for the purpose of providing affordable rental housing. So, you know, if we're serious about it, we can, and Councillor O'Shea touched on some of these things, we can't just sort of pass it on to other levels of government. We actually have something that we can do, whether we agree as a council that that's what we want to do, but I would certainly like to examine that and to see what our possibilities are, to have you come to us and explore some of these schemes and what that would look like for us. And
certainly these are old chestnuts that have been baking around the fire for a long time, you know, inclusionary zoning, Docklands, for example, in Melbourne, a huge billion-dollar project that's been going for 20 years now, kicked off with a very high percentage of inclusion of, they were looking for a mixed use and also a mixture of the type of people that were living in Docklands. They didn't want it just be the knobs that were living there. But there are weaknesses in the system which we can talk about.
So
I won't bore you with it today, but you know, if it was easy and if it was as great a concept as comes around every generation, it'd be with us. We'd be all doing it. But there are issues,
it's our commitment as a council. So if we could have a session and hear about it.
A lot of it's financial.
Okay.
Yeah, and certainly I'm not dismissing the fact that we can bring that into the conversation about housing when we talk to the good folk from Brisbane Housing et al.
That will be great. Councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to add to the debate, I think, you know, this is time and another place for that discussion, but as this is a national crisis, and certainly it's not just ours, it's everywhere, and I know we're all concerned about it. We, as the bottom of the food chain, probably can't do a lot except to lobby in other areas. But I'm wondering, with the ALGA conference, as Councillor Bill has mentioned with LGAQ, I'm not sure whether their call for motions has closed. I'm not sure. If it hasn't, it will soon. So perhaps we should put some type of a motion before both assemblies. if we can, and just, I'm certain other councils will, but at the end of the day, we should do it on behalf of our community. I think that's our responsibility. Our responsibility, I believe, is to lobby on behalf of our community. Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you. I look forward to the discussion at the briefing. I just wondered though, Stuart, could you remind us what our social housing obligations are in the PDA, the Railway Parklands area? Don't we have social housing obligations there as part of that?
That's a good question. I might have to take that on notice.
Danielle's saying no.
I don't recall it.
I thought we did. I thought that was all part of the planning.
You could well be right.
We do.
It's, I'll check that up and let you know.
Thank you.
Let all councillors know.
Councillor Summerfield.
It's a difficult one in the sense of just trying to do it on its own. It's got to form part of a major policy platform. But anyway, I'll have a look. We'll check.
Thank you. Can I have someone move that the report be noted? Councillor Carl and Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. And now can I have someone move that we adjourn the meeting? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Shine. All those in favour? Water and waste.
Good morning, councillors. We'll start the Water and Waste Committee for May. I'd like to welcome Portfolio Leader Councillor Summerfield, acknowledge Mayor Antonio, Deputy Mayor McDonald, CEO Brian Pidgeon, General Manager Damien Platts, all the staff who are in the room today, my fellow councillors, and we've got Matt Tor here who's going to present. Thanks everybody who's watching online, the multitude. We had some nice rain last night and hopefully we'll hear later today that the catchments received some of that rain. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Moving to item 2 on the agenda, attendance including apologies, leave of absence and declarations of conflict of interest. I don't have any apologies or leave of absence worth noting, and no declarations of conflict of interest as far as I'm aware. So that puts us to item 3 on the agenda, the bulk curbside waste collection. As I said, we've got the Manager of Waste Services. Oh, sorry.
If I could just mention that I did flag a motion that I wanted to move, not to precede Matt's information today, but just to make sure that other councillors are aware that that was flagged.
And when do you receive that motion? Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Shine. So, yes, Manager of Waste Services, Matt Tor, here today to speak with us. And I just remind councillors in this as we're speaking, there is that one confidential attachment, and it's confidential it's commercial in confidence, so all other details can be discussed in this session. Matt, over to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. This report today considers options for a domestic bulk curbside collection service, and the report is in response to interest expressed by council in exploring options for this type of service. Just as a way of background, Toowoomba Regional Council has never offered a bulk curbside waste collection service, though several pre-amalgamated councils did offer a service of some form or another at various times. Bulk waste collection services across Queensland are not common. From the research we've undertaken, we've found that only around 8 of Queensland's 77 councils have such a service, and only 6 of the 12 councils with over 100,000 residents offer a service. And that's actually 5 at the moment, as Brisbane City Council has delayed their services until 2022 at this stage. Over the past several months, we've looked in detail at the options, costs and risks associated with providing a service. Included in this assessment was consideration of a full scheduled street-by-street service, on-call collection services and smaller scale trials. The outcome of this review is that the implementation of a service of any form is not recommended. This recommendation is based on a range of considerations, and I'll briefly go through some of those now. Firstly, this is a new service provided by Council and would require additional funding over the existing budget. The cost of a service is quite significant. To service all residents within the existing wheelie bin collection area, the cost would be between $1.5 and $2.3 million per year, depending on the configuration of the service. The service is likely to be used by only 20 to 25% of the population, but funded, at least in part, by all ratepayers. The service would therefore be heavily subsidised and not in line with the principle of user pays. The service is likely to drive poorer environmental outcomes due to reduced reuse and recycling of materials, and the end result being more waste going to landfill. This is contrary to Council's waste management strategy that we adopted earlier this year, and also the state waste strategy. There are significant risks, including damages to footpaths, street trees and private property, injury to pedestrians from material on footpaths, and other roadside impacts, including issues around road safety due to sight distances, and also potentially stormwater paths, material being placed into stormwater paths. Services are likely to lead to scavenging and increased illegal dumping activities that require clean-up and compliance action by Council. And finally, a service of any form is likely to have a significantly negative impact on the jobs and businesses in the region that undertake this type of work. In most cases, the commercial services are more cost-effective and are more flexible in meeting the needs of individual residents. So an example of that is that while a service provided by Council would require residents to place waste on the footpath, a commercial service would be more flexible in being able to go into people's properties, which would service those parts of the community, such as elderly or disabled residents who are, require this type of service. So based on those issues that mentioned, the recommendation is that we do not proceed with any form of bulk waste curbside collection services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Over to the councillors for questions, please.
Just a quick one.
Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Matt. You did mention earlier, Matt, other jurisdictions that are doing this. Yep. Have you had feedback as to whether, or the reasons they don't do it anymore, or where in some cases they are reconsidering doing it?
Yeah, so certainly there's a shift to being reluctant to undertake these services. So as I mentioned, there's only 8 councils in Queensland that we know of that do have this service. Currently there's 7, so Brisbane has deferred their services through to July 2022, and that's based primarily on cost at this stage. But other councils that we've spoken to, it appears that there are a range of issues and concerns with providing the service, but the reality is a lot of these places have had services in place for many years, and it's a very difficult thing to remove a service after that period of time. I do note that there was an article yesterday in Perth and talking about these exact type of services in Perth, and the fact that a range of Perth councils are slowly removing those services because of the issues that I've raised in this report.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, one of the sort of reasons why you think that it's not a good idea is that the impact on other businesses, and I note that in the report somewhere most people were prepared to pay $30 for this service, and So you've got in here the impact on other businesses that it usually starts at around $50. So for disposal of 2 cubic metres of waste. So, to my mind, then we're, you know, that idea that we have it on a user pays. So we're not, to my mind, subsidising it to any great extent, and that those figures around, I suppose I'm not asking a question, I'm just making a comment, those figures around which councils do and which councils don't, they're, you know, 77 councils, but the ones with over 100,000 people, over half of them are having a service like this. So, you know, it's sort of to say that, you know, the little councils are probably not going to have it. I mean, I don't know. I still think that it's a service worth having and worth exploring.
So in relation to the cost, so yes, you're correct that when we conducted our survey, most people were willing to pay a maximum of $30 for a service. And you are correct in the report, it does identify that these type of commercial services are available from $50 and up. And it is difficult to gauge the pricing because obviously we're not going to approach businesses and ask for quotes. So we're looking online and getting that sort of feedback. And there are a large number of businesses that do this type of work. The point is, while commercial businesses can do it for $50 and up, for council, if you refer to the table, it would be costing us between $116 and $170 per service. So that's really the issue there. We'd only be receiving, if we were to charge that $30, there would still be a very large cost per service that would then be funded by the general rate base.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, we're quite a different council. We've got 36 townships, a big city here and a big rural area that does get a wheelie bin service. I personally have a contract with JJ Richards, which I'm soon to stop. It costs me, if there's nothing shifted, $58 a month to have that skip bin there and $70-something to have it removed full of rubbish. So I think at the end of the day, this is the biggest. We can't be all things to all people. Council cannot be all things to all people. This is money we've got to find out of the budget. We can't put down footpaths in some of our communities. You know, and yet we're asking to have everything. Cambodia Shire, the shire of which I was mayor, we used to have once a year collection going around picking up on Clean Up Australia Day, large articles, but that was reasonably easy. That was in 4 townships. We're talking about providing a service here for all of our ratepayers on a regular basis, and that money has to come from somewhere. So we'll be taking money from one other service to go there, and normally it's from infrastructure. So in the meantime then, our planning and the things we need to provide for our community that we do provide, and it is our responsibility to provide, waste collection has come for many, many years at a user pay level, I drag 2 bins every fortnight 80 metres up to my driveway. So I still pay for the privilege of doing that, and then on the alternate week take another bin up. I pay for our admin costs and, like everyone else, and the cost of that bin service. So I think that that's reasonable. And I think that if you've got people coming in, and my mother's a pensioner, she gets people come in, clean the house and pay a little bit extra to take the rubbish away. I think this is a service that I think in our minds we might all like to have. But when it comes down to paying user pay what it actually really costs us, I think our ratepayers would say no. And I would say that if we adopt this, then the money has to come from somewhere, so we'll be impacting another service that we actually provide for our community, whereas waste collection at the moment is user pay. So I can't support it.
Councillor Taylor, the recommendation that is before us actually is the council.
Yes, I support the recommendation. Thank you. I can't support any change to the recommendation. I'm sorry.
I've got Councillor Shine and then Councillor Summerfield.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just a question to Matt. When you refer to the commercial rate of $50, I take it that commercial people have to pay something at the waste facility, How much is that?
That's correct. So it does depend on the type of vehicle they're driving and whether they go to O'Mara Road or to our major waste facility at O'Mara Road or Clinton, where there's a weighbridge. In most cases, the disposal of waste from a ute load is somewhere between 50 and 100 kilos, which means that the cost to dispose, if it is all going to landfill, is around between $9 and $18. If there is a portion of that material that is recyclable, that cost goes down to around about between $6 and $12 to dispose of. If it is all recyclable or all can be on-sold at our tip shop, it'll be accepted for free.
Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in relation to, I just wanted a couple of questions if I could, thanks Matt. In relation to the private businesses that do the minimum $50 pickup, can you confirm they can actually go into the house and collect like heavy furniture or something like that, whereas for us we would actually only be taking it from the footpath. They would actually have to get it out to the footpath. And I'm thinking of a pensioner, because I do believe that this would be the main focus. Older people who may not have a ute or whatever, or someone who can help them. So, firstly, that they can actually go in, whereas we can't. Is that right?
Yes, so council certainly we would not be going into people's properties to collect furniture. Obviously, businesses would have their own systems and processes around that, but our understanding is most of the businesses that do this, and a lot of these are home maintenance businesses, and often grass clipping businesses during dry periods or winter periods do this type of work, and our understanding is yes, they do go into people's properties to collect waste.
Thank you. And so then my second question was around recycling. Obviously that's my hat, that to make sure that people are recycling as much as possible. So those private businesses that do this would also have the opportunity to either on-sell, do up whatever pieces they pick up, whereas if council was picking it up, it would all just go straight into general waste. There wouldn't be any recycling opportunities there.
Yeah, so with private businesses, it would definitely be in their interest to do as much sorting as they can, because obviously that will reduce the charge at the waste facility. For council, there is always the option to take all the materials from the street and put it into a sorting area. The contractor that was chosen for that would need to have a large area that they were able to do the sorting. That would obviously just add to the cost. So while it is possible, that's not how most of these processes work around the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor McMahon, please.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I welcome the report, Matt, and I think this would be a great service to have, but in my opinion, the numbers just aren't stacking up for me. I think the commercial service that can do a better job for cheaper is a very big factor to take into account here. Not to mention we've got to find $2 million somewhere in the budget for something that 20% of the population are going to use, your stats. So I welcome those numbers and based on that. But if I could just share my experience in the waste facilities on the Sunshine Coast, having relatives up there, their tip is very expensive. Yeah. And you go there and it is very expensive. And then one must put different bits of waste in different areas around the tip. As a result of that, I feel like that community doesn't want to pay large amounts of money, and certainly not bagging what they do because they have a very good waste system, but may lead to an increase in things like illegal dumping or people not wanting to go to the tip and as a result wanting a curbside clearance. Certainly a lot of new members to Toowoomba region say to me how amazing it is that we have, it's not free, it's in your rate, so we know that, but it's much more user friendly, and for domestic waste you don't pay money at the door, and we mustn't forget the huge asset that is to Toowoomba region. If you're going to put it in the back of your ute when it's free to go to the tip, you're not going to illegal dump it. And I appreciate there's a strong market for elderly or pensioners or those who can't get it, and that's why I welcome the commercial contractors who can do it cheaper than we can. So I think we're in a very good place here, and I welcome the report and the recommendation. So thanks, Matt.
Any other questions from councillors? That being the case, so we've got an officer recommendation there that council does not proceed with the implementation sorry Wendy, we could just get it back up again, with the implementation of a bulk curbside waste collection service. Councillor Shine has also flagged his alternate recommendation. I'm in your hands as to which would like to be moved. Councillor Carl?
I'm happy to move the recommendation as per the officers.
Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Summerfield as the seconder. We'll go to debate, I suppose, if there's a desire to debate. Councillor Carl, as the mover of that, would you like to kick us off?
Are we debating? Sorry, I wasn't. Okay.
Is there opposition, I suppose?
I would assume so, given that there's an alternate recommendation that's been flagged.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. I'd like to elaborate on the confidential table, but I can't. But most of the points have been raised around the room. 20 to maximum 25% of the population would benefit from this service. The rest would subsidise. The at-risk, what I'd call the at-risk component of our community that would benefit from this service, I dare say, via commercial operators, which we would be in competition with, or undermining the viability of their business as a council for a start. But I dare say some of the real at-risk people, though people with a disability, infirmed, may very well have other options through financial support for core services such as waste disposal. I'd be very surprised if they didn't, because ultimately it's a public health issue. So I would say that they, I can't say absolutely ironclad, but having some association with parts of the sectors, would be very surprised if they didn't have other avenues to access as far as assistance with this. The point has already been raised about that we're a diverse region. I grow a little bit wearisome of being compared to a major urban council that is principally an urban, closely populated entity as a local government authority, and yet we, as Councillor Taylor has already raised, are a diverse region where we would have to operate this service at a greater cost per lift or pick up from curbside, averaging, when you take into the logistics, the account of logistics across the region, i.e. distance travelled, also what I call critical mass, or the volume of waste, it would average out far greater per item of service in this region than many regions we're being compared to, of which I thought there was, Matt's figures were only five or six out of the councils over 100,000 residents were offering this service, and there is a diminishing view of long-term offering this anyway. The other thing that is probably the clincher for me, and that is that, and it sounds a little bit harsh, I know, and I think about as my family members get older, we are all generators of waste. That is the bottom line. So how we efficiently provide a service, and I think it's already been highlighted adequately from the officers, that private enterprise has a role to play in offering support in this area. So I think on that basis, that we're all generators of waste, I think we need to look at that efficiently, how we deliver long-term, sustainable, effective, and Councillor McMahon's raised and highlighted the benefits of how we do things in this region as compared to others already. So I think if we're going to continue in that vein, we have to look at an order of priority about how we deliver the most cost-effective, sustainable waste service into the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Carl. I've got a speaker against, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. When we talk about doing things at council, we always talk about the community feedback and community consultation. So 68% of respondents support the introduction of domestic bulk curbside waste collection service. I mean, I place a fair bit of importance on that. And if we're talking about when some things go in and some things go out, this is probably not a great example, and we can all pick off things that we think are important. But perhaps an 8-lane pool in Millmerran might be considered an over-service, perhaps. So, you know, I don't think that that's kind of the argument here at council, because we are ultimately, to me, a customer service organisation. So I would implore councillors, even if you don't feel that we should be providing the full service, to at least consider option number 3, which is the trial to take up and practicality of this service, which could then inform the future decisions relating to the bulk curbside waste collection. So rather than just throw this whole sort of scheme out, at its very least, consider providing some level of service to the community based on that community feedback.
Thank you. Do I have a speaker for? Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this conversation has gone round and round the table over the years, ever since I've been on council, probably before I even got on there, and it's never ever stacked up. And there's been a reason for that, and that is the cost to community. So it's all ratepayers, depending on the option. All ratepayers would have to foot the bill, or it would be subsidised. There would be some sort of giving into it. And I'd think about the small businesses. You know, we've got 20 small businesses in our region that would be impacted by this if we decide to do it. Those small businesses provide an improved service, cheaper service, improved service by the fact that they'll actually go into the house yard, into the home, whatever the options are, to take away whatever needs to be taken away. We would be in competition to those businesses, and I'm never comfortable when council gets in competition with small business in our community, and I think the Local Government Act restricts us in relation to that. There's commentary in the Local Government Act about the fact that we can't get involved in competition. So I think we need to be very careful here. And when you think about the recycling opportunities, here we are, we've got a state government who, and good on them, who are increasing the percentage of reduction of waste to landfill, and we need to continue to drive towards those targets, and yet here we would be actually either increasing the cost of providing this service by providing an area which would then be sorted to take out what could be recycled and whatever, or it would all go to landfill, whereas the small businesses have the opportunity to recycle. So I think, you know, we need to be considering all the facets here and thinking about those 20 small businesses that probably do it tough, you know, when the grasses aren't being mown in winter and that's the only option they've got for a bit of extra income. Should we as a big organisation be coming in competition to them, reducing their ability to have an income to feed their families?
Thank you. Councillor Summerfield. Speaker against, Councillor Shine.
No, thank you. Just on that point of Councillor Summerfield, I haven't seen any evidence of the effect on small business. If there was an adequate service being supplied by small business at the moment, then there would be no support for this proposal that I wanted to put up in relation to having a trial and ultimately to bring in a bulk service. We do know, as Councillor Megan O'Hara-Sullivan referred to, that even on the officer's own report of the survey that they undertook, that 913 respondents, which in my experience is a large number of people who responded, 68% were in favour of it. It hasn't been revealed how many were opposed or how many just didn't, had no opinion. So it's quite high. It's consistent with a Chronicle Online survey that was taken in June last year. 70% of people supported it. So clearly the people of Toowoomba region who were consulted in that survey or who participated in that online survey were in favour of it, well and truly. It's what our citizens want. What I was in my foreshadowed motion wanting to achieve was a ascertainment of the exact cost of a survey of a trial and pick out specific locations. I had in mind, for example, in my old electorate of Toowoomba North, areas like North Toowoomba and Harlexton, where older members of the population still reside, but also it has to be, you have to pick out a regional centre as well, something, an older one with perhaps new subdivisions attached to it, like Cambodia, for example, would have been ideal. If we, as I understand, if this motion is carried, then it does away with my foreshadowed one. Look, I just repeat the point without labouring it, that clearly this is wanted by the people of Toowoomba. It's not one of those feel-good or fun type things that we ridicule from time to time. It's, dealing with rubbish is one of the most basic things that councils ought to do. It's core business. It's one of those 3 rates, rubbish or roads items, and I would ask councillors to, in the spirit of representative democracy, where we represent the people that have put us here, and in my case I campaigned on this basis that we should have this, in that spirit of representative democracy, that we do represent the majority of people who want this, and therefore reject the officer's recommendation so that we can then proceed with, hopefully with my motion with respect to holding a trial.
Thank you, Councillor Shine. Do I have a speaker for? Councillor Antonio.
Look, I'm happy to say a few words, Chair. I think the service that's being provided by the private sector is a good one, but I just wonder if we've reached a point where, given the need for this, whether we ought to have a list of preferred suppliers who are actually doing this, that we knew were reliable, they did it well. It may be an option for us, but I think I take on board the recommendations of Matt and the team. I also understand exactly what Councillor Shine is saying, but in my view, on balance, it's important that we let the private sector do this. If there is a problem with the private sector at some given time, well, maybe then we ought to reconsider it. But as far as I'm concerned, there are suppliers out there who could do it well. The only thing I would suggest is that maybe we ought to have our preferred suppliers who we know, who do the job well, and work from there.
Thank you, Councillor Antonio. Any further speakers against? That being the case, we'll move to the vote. We've got a mover and Councillor... Oh, sorry, apologies, Councillor Kyle, of course.
Thanks, Chair. I will sum up just on a few points that have been made around the room. Firstly, roads, rates, rubbish, core service, absolutely correct. And that's why I argue that we should look at this long-term and in a sensible, sustainable manner, as opposed to comparing it with a community service obligation of a pool. Important, yes, the pool, but I suggest to you, under the RRR, roads, rates, rubbish, and a public health and safety issue, that we look at this long-term sensibly, because we know, as well as every other local government authority, that the cost of dealing with waste will head north with imposed legislation and future legislation coming our way. So I don't think we should be comparing it to community service obligations and trials. Please, let's not patronise our community with a trial when we know there are demonstrated, from other local government authorities, demonstrated costs for uplift of this type of collection. And I'd suggest to you at a cheaper rate compared to a different community or numbers of communities within our region. So we know the obvious answer after a trial. We've already got the figures in front of us, which I can't allude to specifically because it's a confidential document and it may, give people an advantage if we were to go the other way. So that's why. But I'd really love to, because it's really obvious that we wouldn't be taking a sustainable long-term view of waste collection and public health. The other thing about having no demonstrated impacts on private sector, that's because we haven't wanted to venture into this trial, because when I think about, and I've viewed this from a distance, not that far away. In fact, my family member was involved in real estate some time ago, and I can tell you that from listening to the discourse through that office around the numbers of handymen that business would be taken away from them on a call out, because they specifically were called out to collect waste or an item of furniture or something else to take away to the waste management facility, or the likes of small franchisees, their ability to have a revenue stream from waste that needed to be collected from private residents. That would all be somewhat diminished, I would dare say. And as far as a survey, I just wonder if residents, and that's why it's a confidential document, but if we could actually indicate to them at what cost would this service come, I just wonder would those percentage rates on the survey be somewhat different if they understood the cost of delivering this service and how much subsidy would have to happen. So surveys are great, but if you aren't able to provide that sort of background, then I somewhat question the credibility of those questions posed. And as far as representation, I feel that, and I've already questioned the validity of the survey and the background information and understanding the costs, but as far as representation, I think we do have a serious responsibility to think long-term, take the long-term view, a sustainable view, and around a critical core service that is responsible for public health into the future. Thanks, Madam Chair. I know it was a while, but I wanted to make those points.
Thank you, Councillor. So the recommendation is that Council does not proceed with the implementation of a bulk curbside waste collection service. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Recommendation is carried. That's the only item that we have. Thank you very much for that, Matt. We'll conclude the Water and Waste Committee meeting for May at 10:34. Thanks, Wendy.
Wendy. They need to come up. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of Toowoomba Regional Council. I'd like to welcome the Mayor and councillors, and the meeting's open to the public and is also being live streamed. I'd like to thank those of our staff teams that are with us today, and I acknowledge everyone who is watching via our social media channels. I'd like to open our Infrastructure Services Committee meeting, recognising our portfolio leader, Councillor Melissa Taylor, but I'd like to inform the body of the meeting and the public that Infrastructure Services Group has no items on the committee agenda for May. Now I would like to ask Council to, I'll close the meeting, but we will go for a short break. Thank you.
Councillors, we resume the meeting at 10:55. And with that, can I have someone move that we close the meeting? Thank you. Councillor McDonald, Councillor O'Shea, all those in favour? Thank you. Okay, so item number 6, the Development Services Planning and Environment Court Appeals and Compensation Claims for April 2021. Can I have someone move that we note that report? Councillor Carl, Councillor Von Hoff, all those in favour? It's carried. And item number 7 is the regional enforcement actions for April 2021. Councillor McDonald and Councillor O'Shea, all those in favour? Carried. We conclude the meeting at 11:18. That's a record.